Africa is a continent that simultaneously evokes admiration and anxiety in the mass consciousness. At the mention of this region, many people imagine the Egyptian pyramids, the ruins of ancient Carthage, the mighty Victoria Falls, and the sacred Mount of Moses, Har Sinai. The continent is perceived as the cradle of ancient civilizations, a territory of colossal natural wealth, the rarest animals, and amazing natural landscapes. However, since early childhood, the image of Africa has often been distorted by primitive horror stories like "Children, don't go to Africa for a walk." Added to this are the stories of mothers and grandmothers about starving African children, used to scare a child into finishing their hated porridge. Over time, children's stories are replaced by darker and seemingly quite real plots, mentions of figures like the cannibal emperor Bokassa, or tragedies on the scale of the Rwandan genocide. As a result, for most people, the idea of Africa is a messy mixture of news reports, superficial school knowledge of geography, and sensational stories from yellow newspapers and internet sites of the same ilk. Gradually, the entire continent begins to be perceived as a single knot of civil wars, famine, military coups, epidemics, and even cannibalism. At the same time, it cannot be said that such troubles do not exist in Africa at all, but they do not occur everywhere and not constantly. That is why the main question arises: what prevented the peoples of the Black Continent from developing to the level of other regions of the world? Some explain this by the arid climate and long-term isolation from the rest of the world. Others believe that too easy survival conditions do not stimulate progress, and others point to the destructive influence of slavery and the intervention of external forces. In the end, an eternal question appears: why Africa still remains poor, and what is wrong with it at all? At the same time, it is well known that Africa possesses huge natural, land, and human resources, significant reserves of manganese, bauxite, chromites, various types of fuel, cobalt and copper ores, gold, platinum, diamonds, phosphorites, uranium, and many other minerals are concentrated on its territory. States such as Nigeria, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and some others are among the world leaders in the extraction of oil, gas, and precious metals. The total area of Africa is almost 30 million square kilometers, and even despite the significant spaces of deserts and semi-deserts, about 9 million square kilometers of land remain suitable for economic activity, which exceeds the area of the whole of Brazil. Agriculture continues to be the basis of the economy of most African countries, and theoretically, with such a set of resources, the continent could become one of the richest regions of the planet. Speaking of Africa in this context, it is important to clarify that we are primarily talking about the so-called Black Africa, and not about the northern part of the continent belonging to the Mediterranean world, where the ancient Egyptian civilization and Carthage existed. The idea that Africa was historically civilizationally backward is greatly exaggerated if we consider the history of the continent as a whole. At certain stages, African societies were not only not inferior to Europe, but sometimes even surpassed it. For example, the Bronze Age was practically absent on the continent due to a lack of necessary resources, so the transition from the Stone Age occurred immediately to the Iron Age. In addition, many states arose here that were quite developed by medieval standards and differed little from the European states of that time. Bright examples are the Mali Empire and the Songhai Empire that replaced it, which existed from the 13th to the 16th century, as well as the state of Monomotapa in southern Africa, which flourished from the 15th to the 18th century, and was famous for its gold riches, which Arab merchants and travelers wrote about back in the 10th century. To the same row belongs Ethiopia, known in antiquity as the Kingdom of Aksum, one of the first Christian states in the history of mankind. All these examples show that the notion of a, quote, one is a persistent stereotype. Different peoples began their historical development in fundamentally different geographical conditions, and the decisive role in the formation of societies is played by climate, the presence of rivers, suitable cultivated plants, domestic animals, and trade routes, and not some innate quote "too." Cultural and psychological characteristics are formed under the influence of fundamental factors independent of man, and one of these factors was the climate, the favorability of which in relation to Africa is often greatly overestimated. The continent is often perceived as a homogeneous space, although in reality, climatic conditions here vary sharply from region to region. Even outside the Sahara, the situation remains difficult. An oceanic desert climate prevails on the west coast, a continental moderately arid climate in the central regions, a marine trade wind climate in the east, and as a result, even the most favorable areas remain quite dry and poorly adapted for sustainable agriculture. The Sahara Desert is not just a huge sea of sand, but a real logistical black hole, since travels through it since ancient times have been extremely dangerous and seriously hindered both trade and the migration of the population. And where there is no active movement of people and goods, there is no full-fledged exchange of technologies and culture. While Europe and Asia were connected for millennia by a dense network of trade routes, including the Great Silk Road, the inhabited part of Africa remained almost completely isolated from the rest of the world for a long time. An additional blow to development was epidemics and extremely dangerous fauna, since nowhere on Earth is there such a number of organisms potentially deadly to humans as in Africa. For centuries, the continent's demography was undermined not only by farming difficulties but also by constant epidemics. If the tsetse fly, which carries sleeping sickness, did not exist in Europe and Asia, then in Africa such threats became a chronic problem. To this were added malaria mosquitoes, huge parasitic worms, black mambas, Nile crocodiles, fat-tailed scorpions, and many other creatures that coexist very poorly with humans. In addition, it was from the African jungles that mankind received yellow fever, one of the most dangerous viral diseases of the New World, because of which ships raised yellow flags with the image of a skull and bones, and entire cities died out, which gave rise to legends about curses and the revenge of African gods. A vaccine against this disease appeared only in 1937, but even after that, yellow fever continued to threaten the poorest regions of Africa, as did the Ebola, Lassa, Marburg, and West Nile viruses. The most destructive factor for the continent was colonization, since it was the acquaintance with civilized Europe that for several centuries turned Africa into a source of cheap raw materials and slave labor, and then led to its almost complete division among the powers of the Old World. Colonial rule kept African societies not just at the feudal, but often at the tribal level. This process began at the end of the 19th century, when Europe received quinine to fight malaria, rifled weapons, a powerful industry, and knowledge of the inner regions of the continent, while simultaneously being in dire need of new markets. The first shot in the colonial race can be considered the events of 1876 in Brussels, when the Belgian King Leopold II, under the guise of humanitarian projects, began the seizure of the Congo Basin and turned the so-called Congo Free State into his personal property. The exploitation of the local population on rubber plantations, in mines, and on road construction was accompanied by brutal repressions and the death of a huge number of people. Following this, England, France, Portugal, Spain, Germany, and Italy joined the partition of Africa, and the resistance of the African peoples, the Ashanti, Zulus, Fulbe, Tuaregs, and Herero, was suppressed with extreme cruelty, up to genocide. During 3 centuries of the slave trade, millions of Africans were exported or died. Alcohol became an important tool of colonial subordination, especially within the framework of the so-called Golden Triangle of Trade, and by the beginning of the 20th century, Africa was almost completely divided between European powers, although resistance continued until the 1920s, and only Ethiopia, under the rule of Menelik II, managed to maintain independence. The colonizers built limited infrastructure, schools, and hospitals, but did not form independent local elites, and the population was not prepared for the responsibility of decision-making, which became a serious problem after decolonization. In the process of liberating African countries, the USSR played an important role, considering the support of anti-colonial movements as a way to weaken the capitalist camp, especially after the Suez Crisis of 1956. It was with the active support of Moscow that 1960 received the name Year of Africa, when 17 states gained independence. In subsequent years, the Soviet Union invested billions of dollars, supplied weapons, and received raw materials in return. The collapse of the USSR in 1991 opened a new stage of the struggle for influence on the continent. The United States linked economic aid with tough political demands, which often did not yield the expected result, while China and India chose the strategy of Asian soft power, actively investing without demands for democratic reforms and successfully expanding their presence by cooperating with practically any regimes. In the end, the combination of climatic, geographical, biological, colonial, and foreign policy factors still prevents African states from standing on a par with the leading powers of the world, and attempts at independent unification, similar to the initiatives of Muammar Gaddafi, have already been made but ended tragically. So the question remains open, whether the Black Continent will ever be able to follow its own successful path of development. Friends, share in the comments what you think about this story. If the video was interesting, support us with a like and subscription to the channel. Until next time.